Genesis 28. Isaac called Jacob and blessed him. Then Isaac commanded him, "You must not marry a Canaanite woman. Go to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, in northwest Mesopotamia. Laban, your mother's brother, lives there. Marry one of his daughters. May God all-powerful bless you and give you many children. May you become the father of many peoples. May the Lord give you and your descendants the blessing of Abraham. Then you may own the land where you are now living as a stranger. This is the land God gave to Abraham." So Isaac sent Jacob to northwest Mesopotamia. Jacob went to Laban, the brother of Rebekah. Bethuel the Aramean was the father of Laban and Rebekah was the mother of Jacob and Esau. Esau learned that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him to northwest Mesopotamia. Jacob went to find a wife there. Esau also learned that Isaac had commanded Jacob not to marry a Canaanite woman, and Esau learned that Jacob had obeyed his father and mother. He had gone to northwest Mesopotamia. So Esau saw that his father Isaac did not want his sons to marry Canaanite women. Now Esau already had wives, but he went to Ishmael, son of Abraham, and he married Mahalath, Ishmael's daughter. Mahalath was the sister of Nebaioth. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. He came to a place and spent the night there because the sun had set. He found a stone there and laid his head on it to go to sleep. Jacob dreamed that there was a ladder resting on the earth and reaching up into heaven, and he saw angels of God going up and coming down the ladder. And then Jacob saw the Lord standing above the ladder. The Lord said, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your grandfather, and I am the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are now sleeping. Your descendants will be as many as the dust of the earth. They will spread east and west, north and south. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. I am with you, and I will protect you everywhere you go. And I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, but I did not know it." Jacob was afraid. He said, "This place frightens me. It is surely the house of God and the gate of heaven." Jacob rose early in the morning. He took the stone he had slept on and set it up on its end. Then he poured olive oil on the top of it. At first, the name of that city was Luz, but Jacob named it Bethel. Then Jacob made a promise. He said, "I want God to be with me and protect me on this journey. I want God to give me food to eat and clothes to wear. Then I will be able to return in peace to my father's house. If the Lord does these things, he will be my God. This stone which I have set up on its end will be the house of God, and I will give God 1/10 of all he gives me." Matthew chapter 27. Early the next morning, all the leading priests and elders of the people decided to kill Jesus. They tied him, led him away, and turned him over to Pilate, the governor. Judas saw that they had decided to kill Jesus. Judas was the one who gave Jesus to his enemies. When Judas saw what happened, he was very sorry for what he had done. So he took the 30 silver coins back to the priests and the leaders. Judas said, "I sinned. I gave you an innocent man to be killed." The leaders answered, "What is that to us? That's your problem, not ours." So Judas threw the money into the temple. Then he went off and hanged himself. The leading priests picked up the silver coins in the temple. They said, "Our Lord does not allow us to keep this money with the temple money. This money has paid for a man's death." So they decided to use the coins to buy a field called Potter's Field. This field would be a place to bury strangers who died while visiting Jerusalem. That is why the field is still called the Field of Blood. So the thing came true that Jeremiah the prophet had said, They took 30 silver coins. That is how little the Israelites thought he was worth. They used those 30 silver coins to buy potter's field, as the Lord commanded me. Jesus stood before Pilate, the governor. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Yes, I am." When the leading priests and the elders accused Jesus, he said nothing. So Pilate said to Jesus, "Don't you hear these people accusing you of all these things?" But Jesus said nothing in answer to Pilate. Pilate was very surprised at this. Every year at the time of Passover, the governor would free one person from prison. This was always a person the people wanted to be set free. At that time, there was a man in prison who was known to be very bad. His name was Barabbas. All the people gathered at Pilate's house. Pilate said, "Which man do you want me to free, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ?" Pilate knew that they gave Jesus to him because they were jealous. Pilate said these things while he was sitting on the judge's seat. While he was sitting there, his wife sent a message to him. The message said, "Don't do anything to that man. He is not guilty. Today I had a dream about him, and it troubled me very much." But the leading priests and elders told the crowd to ask for Barabbas to be freed, and for Jesus to be killed. Pilate said, "I have Barabbas and Jesus. Which do you want me to set free to you?" The people answered, "Barabbas!" Pilate asked, "What should I do with Jesus, the one called the Christ?" They all answered, "Kill him on a cross." Pilate asked, "Why do you want me to kill him? What wrong has he done?" But they shouted louder, "Kill him on a cross!" Pilate saw that he could do nothing about this, and a riot was starting. So he took some water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. Then he said, "I am not guilty of this man's death. You are the ones who are causing it." All the people answered, "We will be responsible. We accept for ourselves and for our children any punishment for his death." Then Pilate freed Barabbas. Pilate told some of the soldiers to beat Jesus with whips. Then he gave Jesus to the soldiers to be killed on a cross. Pilate's soldiers took Jesus into the governor's palace. All the soldiers gathered around Jesus. They took off his clothes and put a red robe on him. Then the soldiers used thorny branches to make a crown. They put this crown of thorns on Jesus' head. They put a stick in his right hand. Then the soldiers bowed before Jesus and made fun of him. They said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spit on Jesus. Then they took his stick and hit him on the head many times. After they finished making fun of Jesus, the soldiers took off the robe and put his own clothes on him again. Then they led Jesus away to be killed on a cross. The soldiers were going out of the city with Jesus. They forced another man to carry the cross to be used for Jesus. This man was Simon from Cyrene. They all came to the place called Golgotha. Golgotha means the place of the skull. At Golgotha, the soldiers gave Jesus wine to drink. This wine was mixed with gall. He tasted the wine but refused to drink it. The soldiers nailed Jesus to a cross. They threw lots to decide who would get his clothes. The soldiers sat there and continued watching him. They put a sign above Jesus' head with the charge against him written on it. The sign read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 robbers were nailed to crosses beside Jesus, one on the right and the other on the left. People walked by and insulted Jesus. They shook their heads, saying, "You said you could destroy the temple and build it again in 3 days, so save yourself. Come down from that cross if you are really the Son of God." The leading priests, the teachers of the law, and the Jewish elders were also there. These men made fun of Jesus and said, "He saved other people, but he can't save himself. People say he is the King of Israel. If he is the king, then let him come down now from the cross. Then we will believe in him. He trusts in God, so let God save him now, if God really wants him." He himself said, I am the Son of God. And in the same way, the robbers who were being killed on crosses beside Jesus also insulted him. At noon, the whole country became dark. This darkness lasted for 3 hours. About 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you left me alone? Some of the people standing there heard this. They said, he's calling Elijah. Quickly, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled the sponge with vinegar and tied it to a stick. Then he used the stick to give the sponge to Jesus to drink from it. But the others said, don't bother him. We want to see if Elijah will come to save him. Again, Jesus cried out in a loud voice. Then he died. Then the curtain in the temple split into 2 pieces. The tear started at the top and tore all the way down to the bottom. Also the earth shook and rocks broke apart. The graves opened and many of God's people who had died were raised from death. They came out of the graves after Jesus was raised from death. They went into the holy city and many people saw them. The army officer and the soldiers guarding Jesus saw this earthquake and everything else that happened. They were very frightened and said, he really was the Son of God. Many women were standing at a distance from the crosses, watching. These were women who had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for him. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of James and John were there. That evening, a rich man named Joseph came to Jerusalem. He was a follower of Jesus from the town of Arimathea. Joseph went to Pilate and asked to have Jesus' body. Pilate gave orders to the soldiers to give it to Joseph. Then Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth. He put Jesus' body in a new tomb that he had cut in a wall of rock. He rolled a very large stone to block the entrance of the tomb. Then Joseph went away. Mary Magdalene and the other woman named Mary were sitting near the tomb. That day was the day called Preparation Day. The next day, the leading priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. They said, Sir, we remember that while that liar was still alive, he said, after 3 days I will rise from death. So give the order for the tomb to be guarded closely till the 3rd day. His followers might come and steal the body. Then they could tell the people that he has risen from death. That lie would be even worse than the first one. Pilate said, Take some soldiers and go guard the tomb the best way you know. So they all went to the tomb and made it safe from thieves. They did this by sealing the stone in the entrance and then putting soldiers there to guard it. Esther chapter 4. Now Mordecai heard about all that had been done. To show how upset he was, he tore his clothes. Then he put on rough clothes and ashes. And he went out into the city, crying loudly and very sadly. But Mordecai went only as far as the king's gate. This was because no one was allowed to enter that gate dressed in rough cloth. The king's orders reached every area, and there was great sadness and loud crying among the Jews. They gave up eating and cried out loudly. Many Jews lay down on rough cloth and ashes to show how sad they were. Esther's servant girls and eunuchs came to her and told her about Mordecai. Esther was very upset and afraid. She sent clothes for Mordecai to put on instead of the rough cloth, but he would not wear them. Then Esther called for Hattach. He was one of the king's eunuchs, chosen by the king to serve her. Esther ordered him to find out what was bothering Mordecai and why. So Hattach went to Mordecai. Mordecai was in the city square in front of the king's gate. Then Mordecai told Hattach everything that had happened to him. And he told Hattach about the amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury for the killing of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the order to kill the Jews, which had been given in Susa. He wanted Hathach to show it to Esther and to tell her about it. And Mordecai told him to order Esther to go into the king's presence. He wanted her to beg for mercy and to plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther everything Mordecai had said. Then Esther told Hathach to say to Mordecai, "All the royal officers and people of the royal areas know this. No man or woman may go to the king in the inner court without being called. There is only one law about this. Anyone who enters must be put to death. But if the king holds out his gold scepter, that person may live. And I have not been called to go to the king for 30 days. And Esther's message was given to Mordecai. Then Mordecai gave orders to say to Esther, "Just because you live in the king's palace, don't think that out of all the Jews you alone will escape. You might keep quiet at this time. Then someone else will help and save the Jews. But you and your father's family will all die. And who knows, you may have been chosen queen for just such a time as this." Then Esther sent this answer to Mordecai, "Go and get all the Jews in Susa together. For my sake, give up eating. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night and day. I and my servant girls will also give up eating. Then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I die, I die." So Mordecai went away. He did everything Esther had told him to do. Acts chapter 27. It was decided that we would sail for Italy. An officer named Julius, who served in the emperor's army, guarded Paul and some other prisoners. We got on a ship and left. The ship was from the city of Adriamathan and was about to sail to different ports in Asia. Aristarchus, a man from the city of Thessalonica in Macedonia, went with us. The next day we came to Sidon. Julius was very good to Paul. He gave Paul freedom to go visit his friends, who took care of his needs. We left Sidon and sailed close to the island of Cyprus because the wind was blowing against us. We went across the sea by Cilicia and Pamphylia. Then we came to the city of Myre in Lycia. There the officer found a ship from Alexander that was going to Italy, so he put us on it. We sailed slowly for many days. We had a hard time reaching Cnidus because the wind was blowing against us. We could not go any farther that way, so we sailed by the south side of the island of Crete, near Salmon. We sailed along the coast, but the sailing was hard. Then we came to a place called Safe Harbors, near the city of Lasea. But we had lost much time. It was now dangerous to sail, because it was already after the day of cleansing. So Paul warned them, "Men, I can see there will be a lot of trouble on this trip. The ship and the things in the ship will be lost. Even our lives may be lost." But the captain and the owner of the ship did not agree with Paul. So the officer did not believe Paul. Instead, the officer believed what the captain and the owner of the ship said. And that harbor was not a good place for the ship to stay for the winter. So most of the men decided that the ship should leave. The men hoped we could go to Phoenix. The ship could stay there for the winter. Phoenix was a city on the island of Crete. It had a harbor which faced southwest and northwest. Then a good wind began to blow from the south. The men on the ship thought, "This is the wind we wanted, and now we have it." So they pulled up the anchor. We sailed very close to the island of Crete. But then a very strong wind, named the northeaster, came from the island. This wind took the ship and carried it away. The ship could not sail against it, so we stopped trying to let the wind blow us. We went below a small island named Cauda. Then we were able to bring in the lifeboat, but it was very hard to do. After the men took the lifeboat in, we tied ropes around the ship to hold it together. The men were afraid that the ship would hit the sandbanks of Cyprus. So they lowered the sail and let the wind carry the ship. The next day the storm was blowing us so hard that the men threw out some of the cargo. A day later they threw out the ship's equipment. For many days we could not see the sun or the stars. The storm was very bad. We lost all hope of staying alive. We thought we would die. The men had gone without food for a long time. Then one day Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, I told you not to leave Crete. You should have listened to me. Then you would not have all this trouble and loss. But now I tell you to cheer up. None of you will die, but the ship will be lost. Last night an angel from God came to me. This is the God I worship. I am his. God's angel said, 'Paul, do not be afraid. You must stand before Caesar, and God has given you this promise. He will save the lives of all these men sailing with you. So men, be cheerful. I trust in God. Everything will happen as his angel told me, but we will crash on an island.' On the 14th night, we were floating around the Adriatic Sea. The sailors thought we were close to land. They threw a rope into the water with a weight on the end of it. They found that the water was 120 feet deep. They went a little farther and threw the rope in again. It was 90 feet deep. The sailors were afraid that we would hit the rocks, so they threw 4 anchors in the water. Then they prayed for daylight to come. Some of the sailors wanted to leave the ship, and they lowered the lifeboat. These sailors wanted the other men to think they were throwing more anchors from the front of the ship. But Paul told the officer and the other soldiers, "If these men do not stay in the ship, your lives cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes and let the lifeboat fall into the water. Just before dawn, Paul began persuading all the people to eat something. He said, "For the past 14 days you have been waiting and watching. You have not eaten. Now I beg you to eat something. You need it to stay alive. None of you will lose even one hair off your heads." After he said this, Paul took some bread and thanked God for it before all of them. He broke off a piece and began eating. All the men felt better. They all started eating too. There were 276 people on the ship. We ate all we wanted. Then we began making the ship lighter by throwing the grain into the sea. When daylight came, the sailors saw land. They did not know what land it was, but they saw a bay with a beach. They wanted to sail the ship into the beach, if they could. So they cut the ropes to the anchors and left the anchors in the sea. At the same time, they untied the ropes that were holding the rudders. Then they raised the front sail into the wind and sailed towards the beach. But the ship hit a sandbank. The front of the ship struck there and could not move. Then the big waves began to break the back of the ship to pieces. The soldiers decided to kill the prisoners so that none of them could swim away and escape. But Julius, the officer, wanted to let Paul live. He did not allow the soldiers to kill the prisoners. Instead, he ordered everyone who could swim to jump into the water and swim to land. The rest used wooden boards or pieces of the ship, and this is how all the people made it safely to land.